a piece of advice I got when I was applying to undergrad, and where I went to Chicago. We sat in a meeting. This was at before we were admitted or anything. It was a prospective students weekend, and the dean of the school looked at this room of probably 400 or 500 students and their parents and said, "We could accept this entire room of students into our class. We could kill them all, literally, and we could take the next 1,000 students, and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference." Hello, everyone. Welcome back to How Did You Get In, a show for people curious about the MBA process, actively applying, or just wanting to learn more about business school. Today, we are talking all things waitlist, GMAT versus GRE, and what round to apply in. We hope you enjoy the show. Hey, guys. Just want to put in a little PSA. Today, we're going to be giving some concrete advice about what to do if you get on the waitlist, what round to apply in, and taking the GMAT versus GRE. All of this advice is based off of our own experiences and from talking to classmates. This is not from professional consultants who have been inside the admissions office. So do your own research as well. This is what we've heard from crowdsourcing from our friends and people who have gotten in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to How Did You Get In? Just as a reminder, we are a podcast for people who are interested in getting their MBAs, actively applying to get their MBAs, or just curious about what the whole business school deal is and what it entails and want to learn more. Alex and I are your hosts, and we're going to be doing a little solo or just the two of us episode with no guests. So, hi, Alex. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing, Julia?
I'm good, but we're going to talk about something today that is it's a subject that still gives me the shivers when I think about it. And that is the dreaded waitlist. So it's coming up now. We're at the end of November. When this airs, it'll probably be late November, early December. And we know that the first week of December is when those of you listening who have applied will be getting your decisions back. And you're going to be very, very nervous. And the question we basically have is, what if the decision is no decision and you still are in the waiting game? So Alex, what are have you had any experience on the wait list or friends maybe who went through the wait list, and what was their experience like?
Yeah, so I personally was fortunate enough to avoid the wait list altogether. I actually think it is in some ways crueler than just a straight up rejection. And because you're basically like, oh, so you're telling me I'm almost good enough, or like right on the edge of being good enough. My sister, she was on the wait list for MIT. She applied round one, so found out she was on the wait list in December. She didn't get off the wait list until July. And so it was one of those crazy things where she found out and basically had to really quickly wrap things up at work, and kind of give like a 6-week notice, and just try to scramble and like get her life together. And it sucks because you don't get to, in her case, she didn't get to go to like the admitted students weekends or anything like that. And the whole thing of like, what do you do while on the wait list? And do you bother them, or do you kind of leave them alone? I saw secondhand it's a very stressful process. But yeah, what about yourself?
Oh man, I empathize with your sister. So that week of December, you get decisions rolling in, and I had applied to 6 schools. Right off the bat, was rejected from Stanford, their loss, and got into a handful of others that I was very excited about. But HBS was my last response, and I ran home from work and I checked my email, and it was, you're hoping for the answer, which says the answer is yes, and it was a we don't know yet.
The answer is maybe.
The answer is hold tight. And it's hard. And it's embarrassing. I got really upset, even though I had other good options. And it is better than not. It's better than being rejected. If that's your dream school, it is an infinitely better thing. When you think about it, Alex's sister ended up getting off the wait list. I ended up getting off the wait list. So it certainly feels rough. And so if you end up in that position, allow yourself to feel allow yourself to feel frustrated. And friends and family who are not going through it might not understand because they haven't gone through the same amount of work. They don't understand how it feels to have your future, it's been tied up for a month waiting and now it's this indefinite wait. You're allowed to feel frustrated. But I do have a couple of thoughts, and these are just my suggestions on what to do if you get waitlisted based on my experience. So the first thing, Alex, you brought up a question, which is, do I bother them? Do I not? And I would say take a beat and read what the letter actually says. Some of the letters might ask you for information. They might say, we need a little bit more information here, or this was a weaker part of your application. They might do that. The Harvard waitlist email that I got just said, we don't know yet. We think you're a really compelling applicant, but we're still assessing. And we don't need to hear more from you right now. All we need to know is, do you want to stay on the wait list or not? And so it was pretty clear, and as hard as it is, because you want to say, I can go do more, maybe I'll take the GMAT one more time, I'll send in more recommendations. The response was just say yes or no, I want to stay on this wait list. And so I said yes. And honestly, the next recommendation I have, if it's possible, and if you've applied to more schools or maybe have another school that you've gotten into round one, is to send in that yes, that you want to stay on the wait list, and almost forget that you're on it. I got advice from someone, which was to fall in love with another school. And that's what I did. I fell in love with MIT. And that was amazing. And it's a tough thing to do, because that there's that maybe out there, but you mentally will feel so much better if you convince yourself to love another school while you're waiting.
Mm-hmm. And I do think, so my understanding, and correct me, or, chime in if you disagree, HBS, for example, and I'm assuming every other business school, they have kind of, with no names and faces, they kind of have their ideal class makeup. X% is going to come from a finance background. X% is probably going to be consulting, or X% military, engineers, on and on. And like, they have rough percentages assigned to these, including also demographics and socioeconomic background. And they have, and so basically what they're telling you with that wait list is, you are a really great candidate to fill one of these spots. We just need to see, or like, we want to see the full pool of people we can fill those spots with. Mm-hmm. And like, you're definitely in the running, but maybe you were filling a especially competitive spot, for example. And so is it a competitive one, or is it one with just fewer spots, or it's yep. impossible to say exactly which boxes you're ticking, and which ones maybe they needed to wait on. But frankly, or my guess is, it was a very competitive spot that you were filling.
Yeah, and it's hard. It's hard not to get down on yourself, in particular, when because it's this feeling of like, you're just not quite good enough yet. And they're basically holding a spot to compare you to round two, to see what the round two applicant pool looks like. And I think what's interesting, my experience was, I got waitlisted in December. I cried a little. I got over it. I basically gave myself one day to be sad about it. And then, you forget that it exists. Went and visited all of the other schools that I got into. I visited Wharton and Haas and MIT. And it also hit me, I have some really great other options here. Mm-hmm. And I went to the MIT Accepted Students Weekend and fell in love with it. Was so excited about it. I think I've shared this on another episode, but I bought my mom an MIT mom hat. I committed and saw myself in this other place, and was able to let go of some of the angst about HBS. And that was all in February. And I had to make my deposit to MIT in February. And I did it. I did it without any hesitation, thinking, HBS is who knows what your chances are. And I know that I could have a really good experience at this other place. So I put my deposit down, and I think 2 weeks later, heard from HBS that I got off the wait list, which was it came out of nowhere. You never know when you're going to hear. And I think I almost threw my laptop across the room because I was like, oh my God, like, it's a weird feeling because
Wait, was it an email that said there's an update to your
there's an
application
update to your
status?
application,
Oh
and
my
then it said the
gosh.
answer is yes. It's like we knew it took a little longer, but we want you here. And so then the flood of emotions that comes after, if this happens to you, is, well, they didn't want me the first time around, and now I found this other school, and there's this funny dichotomy because you've tricked yourself into falling in love with another school or a different path. Maybe it's to not go to
Mhm.
school at all. And now you have to sort of take a step back from the mental game that you played to feel okay about it and say, what is really the best decision for me?
It's interesting. It's almost like the analogy with like dating. It's like the one that got away comes back and is like, I'm sorry, I do want you, and like,
Yeah.
yeah, part of the pride thing is like, well, you didn't want me like hard enough the first time, so like F you. But to your point, it's like, no, or you gotta like take a step back and regardless of like the timing of when you're accepted to each, like what could you get at, or like what ultimately is the better fit for you. And you know what, it's not like you're the only one, unless you choose to share, that like you and your close friends and family who you told are the only
Yeah.
ones who ever need to know that you were even on the wait list in the first place. Like
Yeah.
it is not a topic of conversation that comes up. Like regardless of when you got in, we're all like equally deserve to be there.
And it's a good point that you bring up because once that happened and I got in, there was an event for the round two admitted students, like the next weekend in San Francisco. And I went and I felt like I had a giant letter W in R written on my chest. I felt like people could see it, that I didn't really belong. And everyone talks about when you go to one of these schools, the imposter syndrome is really real. Well, the imposter syndrome, when you've been told maybe, oh, yes, actually, we can fit you in, is really hard to get over. But to Alex's point, once you get there, you realize it's a crapshoot. A piece of advice I got when I was applying to undergrad, and where I went to Chicago, we sat in a meeting. This was at before we were admitted or anything. It was a prospective students weekend, and the dean of the school looked at this room of probably 400 or 500 students and their parents and said, "We could accept this entire room of students into our class. We could kill them all, literally, and we could take the next 1,000 students, and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference."
Which is
Um,
insane.
and so to me, I think I had to like swallow some of the hubris and the pride and really say, okay, this path is really not marked. It's not different. It's only different if I allow it to look and feel different. So those are just some pitfalls. If you get that waitlist decision, it's not it's not easy, but it becomes irrelevant so fast.
Mm-hmm. And also, the reality is like, given when you got off the wait list, if you had applied round two, you never
Mhm.
would have even had to, or like, you never would have experienced that wait list panic, which kind of
Yeah.
leads into the next like
Yeah.
question of like, okay, which round is actually better?
Yeah. Well, and before we hop to that, I just want to sum up the couple of key points. If you open your email on December 5th or whatever day it is, and it says you're waitlisted somewhere, couple of steps. First, deep breath. It's not an answer yet. And that is frustrating, but it's not an answer yet. You're allowed to be frustrated and stressed. Give yourself a day, 2 days, whatever you need to process that feeling of all the hard work and still waiting. And then come up with your second best option and really imagine your life that way and fall in love with a different path. And if it happens to change, then you just have two amazing options in front of you to choose from. That's the worst case scenario. If you don't get off the wait list, you found a path that works and that was the right path for you. And as hard as it is, like, do not take the wait list. Personally, we have there were so many students in our section. I know of at least 5, maybe 6 out of 100 that were on the wait list. There was one person who was waitlisted and had gotten offered a spot for the year later. There It happens to more people than you think. It happens to some of the smartest people in the room. Not that that was me, but try not to let it define your experience.
Mm-hmm.
So Alex, you
Absolutely.
brought up the next key question.
Yeah, which round to apply? And so figured we can share what exactly do the numbers say. So in general, like the they accept about or they select a third of the class from round one. Does that sound right? And
Yep.
they create the other two-thirds remaining of the class from round two. And part of that is round two is a bigger applicant pool. But when you boil it down to the acceptance rates, you have round one is a 13% acceptance rate, and round two is around an 8% acceptance rate. And so, really, I mean, sure, you can look at that and say, oh, I absolutely have to apply round one. But the reality is, you really shouldn't apply until you feel ready. So, for example, if applying round two is the difference that allows you to go one more time at the GMAT and go from a 690 to a 730, that's absolutely worth the wait
Mm-hmm.
because you're that much stronger of a candidate. If you frankly like what if you were staffed on a horrible project and you just didn't have the like mental bandwidth to give your essay everything you got and do all of the take in all of the feedback from multiple different people and go at it again, then yes, it is where you want to feel. Just think of, if you did round one, you got rejected, would you feel, well, I could have done more if I had just given myself more time? If that's what you think as you're ready to submit it, you're not ready.
Yep. No, it's a really good question to ask yourself. And the thing to remember, it, because a matter of a couple months doesn't seem like much, but if you if you're not completely ready, this is this could be a decision that is life changing. It directs the path for at least your following 2 years and then maybe more. And so you don't want to live in a world where you felt rushed and you're like, okay, well, I just want to get this out of the way. And then that decides your path for and really the rest of your life. You want to give it your all so you can submit it and the end of it, walk away with the feeling of like, okay, I've done absolutely everything I can. And Alex and I, we both applied round one, to your point, Alex, and I don't regret it. I think the benefit is if you are ready, and you feel like you have your application on lock, it's the best it's going to be. There's not a point more you can get on that GMAT within reason. Then you get the answer sooner, unless you get waitlisted, as we just talked about. But you get the answer sooner, and it allows you a little bit more time to plan, figure out your financial aid, your housing, if you want to go on a trip, and going to all the admitted students weekend. So the real benefit of the round one versus round two is less the acceptance rates, because those vary. The numbers we just talked about vary a little bit year to year, and it's hard to know what that maybe round one acceptance rates higher because that's the people who are the most prepared. It's
Mhm.
hard to say. um, the benefit is really buying yourself that little bit of extra time to plan your life and to get, to have this done, but only if you're fully ready.
And I would say the other thing is like, and that I thought of personally was if I only had the bandwidth, in my opinion, or, like I only had the mental bandwidth, mind share, however you want to say it, and resources because I wasn't working with a professional consultant to do a really good job with applying to two schools. So I was like, okay, now's my time to just figure out like what my top two are and just focus on those. And so the other way to think about it is like round one, go for the top two or three that you really want. And you can always do round two for call it backups, safety. I mean, the reality is like if you're going to, the top 10, like
They're all
you're going to
amazing.
have like an amazing experience and it's going to do amazing things for your career long term. And so, yeah, do a really good job on the ones that you'd be so excited to get into, and give them each of those the amount of time that it deserves. And then If you don't get into any of those, then round two, you've already done a lot of the prep work. Yes, you should absolutely tailor the applications to those schools, but you can, or you're not starting from scratch.
Yep, it's true. The only other two sort of potentials or two other considerations is there are some schools, HBS no longer does it. There are some schools that do round three. Strong recommendation to not do round three unless you have just cured cancer or have had some accomplishment. That means that late in the game, they're going to give one of those very few last spots to you. It's not a recommended path. If you decide you want to go to business school in February and the only round left is in March, it's unless you have truly the most compelling application, something that is so standout, it is better off to wait until that next application cycle. And the only other thing is there are some schools, I believe Columbia Business School included, that do rolling applications. And so that is an example where the earlier you submit, the better, because you are, but you still want to be ready for that application. But because it's on a rolling basis, there are fewer spots as you go. And so you want to be on that earlier end. So those would be my other two caveats. Between round one and round two, it's a matter of preparation. Round three, really like not recommended. And if it's rolling, earlier is better.
Totally agree. And some of what we kind of touched on was, the GMAT, for example, like if round one and round two, the difference is like if you actually think you can go from a 690 to a 730, definitely worth waiting and taking the time to take that test again. I'm curious in general, like your initial thoughts when you started the GMAT process of, what your, what your plan was, what your goal, kind of your goal, how you thought of it as, an asset within the rest of your application.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I knew it was one of the things that I weighed. It was how critical is it going to be to my application? Because I think one thing the GMAT can signal is if you don't have a quant heavy background, it's a way to say, but look, I can do math. I'm going to be able to keep up in these finance and accounting and operations classes. I came from an economics undergrad that is fairly math heavy, but
And a program that's especially known for, like,
yes,
Chicago has an especially great reputation for its quantitative economics.
exactly. So I knew that I needed to do well. I think I set my goal as I need to do somewhere close to the average of what students who get in is, which I think is somewhere between 710 and 720. I took it, I think I've mentioned this, but I took it the first time, 690, and thought, okay, 710 is totally achievable. Took it the second time, 690, thought 610, like this might not be achievable, and then got a 730. And so for me, clearing that 710, 720 hurdle was enough for me to say, okay, I think had I gotten less than that, I might have given it one more shot on goal.
Yeah, I actually don't, I'm pretty sure I still would have gone through with the application, but so the first time I took it, I got a 630, whereas on practice exams, I'd been scoring 690 to 720. So it's like, I know I can do it. And also, it was one of those things where I could tell I was fully aware of the fact that I was panicking mid test, and then the answers were getting easier. And that, like as if you've taken the GMAT, if the questions are getting easier, that's a really bad sign. The questions should, in theory, be getting incrementally harder.
You're not getting smarter during the
So
test in all likelihood.
yeah, exactly. So I basically knew, I was like, oh crap, I like did not do this quant part as nearly as well as I could. And so I knew I needed to take it again. Got a 690 the second time. And I was like, okay, yes, I can apply with that. I had a good undergrad GPA in applied economics, not quite
Mm-hmm.
economics, but, and then my role, I was in marketing prior to applying to business school. And it depends, or, marketing in recent years in this age of digital marketing and direct response marketing has grown very quantitative.
Mm-hmm.
But there still is a lot of brand marketing that is not that it's not quantitative, just not as you know, like not as much building models in Excel like I was. I just made sure to ask my recommenders to just illustrate like the quantitative nature of the job and using data to drive decisions. I knew the combination of getting A's in quantitative classes in undergrad, with asking my recommenders to focus on my quant skills. I knew that with the GMAT, it was also, I fortunately have a friend who's in recruiting at Bain, and she told me that as long as it's above a 690, or as long as it's 690 or above, there's no like red flag in terms of, and so I was like, oh, that's a good signal that, you know, if Bain, McKinsey, and BCG or like don't even think twice about interviewing someone with a 690, then, you know, I feel like that's a positive sign that it's like close enough to a 700.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, I took it for the third time 2 days before my application was due. And luckily that was a 710. And I was like,
Amazing.
Great, that is good enough.
Perfect. No, and I think, I think it's not a make or break. And as you guys might know, if you're doing research, some schools are not even requiring it anymore. Harvard certainly is. And I think a number of the top 10 business schools are. And even if they don't require it, it serves as a signal. Really, I think the main thing is it twofold. One, that you can do math and that you're going to be okay in these quantitative heavy classes because they can be rigorous. And two, if you are, and this is what I've heard, and if you're not a non-native English speaker, it speaks to your ability to have the reading comprehension and verbal skills that will mean that you can read the cases and participate effectively. And so I think there are people there. If it can be additive at all, it is worth including, even if it's not required. And I think the other question that comes up, and I'm curious if you have thoughts on it, Alex, is like GRE versus GMAT. I lean towards GMAT as being the optimal, but we had Matt Ochalski on the podcast earlier, and he knew himself. He took the GRE and he went to Booth, which is arguably one of the more quantitative focused schools. So GMAT is more standard, but you need to do what works for you.
Yeah, I didn't spend too much time thinking GMAT versus GRE. Part of it was because my sister had GMAT books that I didn't have to pay for that I could just use. So frankly, that's good enough reason in my book. But I mean, when in high school, it was more common to apply with SATs, and I happened to just be better at, is it called? It's ACT. Is that the
ACT,
other one?
Yep.
Yeah.
ACT
I happened
versus SAT.
I happened to test better on the ACT, so I went with that just because it fit me better. And so if the GRE does fit you better, then great, stick with that.
Take some practice tests. Find out how you do. The first practice test you take might be alarming, so don't panic. You've plenty of room from there, but take the test that, try out both and see what feels more natural, and where you have some aptitude and where you have less panic. And I do think, I think that GMAT carries more weight. If you're an English major who's worked with nothing, never touched Excel at your job, and it's very clear, I think the GMAT might be the option for you. I'm not going to say it has to be, just because it does have a little bit more quant weight as its reputation than the GRE. And so that's going to be a gap that people are looking for. So it's background dependent. If you need to show that you're going to be able to survive in a finance class, the GMAT is a good way to go. And I think the other question, what you might have picked up on from Alex and I, between the two of us, we've taken the GMAT 6 times. Did you submit all those scores? I guess, Alex, to you first. Did you submit all 3 scores?
I submitted my first and my last. So I submitted that 630, part of it was because I did better on reading, IR, and the writing on that one. And then it also just showed that I could improve, or I don't know. I was like, well, maybe it shows that like I have grit and can go back and improve and show that I can make a lot of progress in a short amount of time. But yeah, I kept it so that in case they super score, pretty sure they don't super score, but I was like, I don't think
Yep.
this hurts.
Yeah, no, I sent all three because my 690s, the scores reversed. And so I had that feeling of like, well, maybe if they look, they know that I'm just a crappy test taker,
Hmm.
rather than, and not crappy. 690, just to be clear, is is good, is solid. But I got B pluses in my some of my economics math classes. So uh I knew that I needed to show that I needed to show some some element of excellence in quant ability. And so took it the third time and submitted all three again to the point of showing grit. I think when you get over three attempts or you submit 700, 700, 700, you know, that might not have the same impact. I think submitting multiple times, if it is showing true progress, shows grit and shows your ability to learn and stick with something, and then can be worthwhile.
Hmm. Yes, agreed. And just curious, when did you start studying for it? When did you, or yeah,
Yeah.
when did you start
Oh,
studying for it? And when was the time you took it the last time?
well, and if any of you have taken it yet, you know, there's the time when you start studying, and I'm using air quotes because that's when you buy the
Yeah.
book and you do a couple practice questions and you look at the answers and you're like, I'm studying. That started a good 2 years before going to school. So probably 6 months before the first time I took the test. I took my first practice test 2 months before the test. And I'd say taking a practice test, that should have happened for me week one. Just
Yes.
to get used to it and to assess where my skills were. And the problem is it's time consuming. It takes 4 hours of your weekend or whenever you're doing it, but you really should be taking one every couple of weeks, as you're working up to it, if you're seriously studying. Don't waste them
Hmm.
because you can't find that many. But I would say I truly started really studying for the GMAT when I got the 690s, probably a month before
Hmm.
in real earnest. And then when I went back the 730 route, I studied in earnest for 3 months before and had a calendar. And I was studying um, 4 days a week for 2 or 3 hours a night, like
Hmm.
with intention rather than just looking at a book. And so I think you have to be
Yep.
honest with yourself about, um, it's not about how far in advance, it's about really dedicating your brain space to it. What about you?
So I started loosely studying it, just like you said. I felt real patting myself on the back for going to Starbucks for an hour and a half on a Saturday. And the yeah, so that was in January, and this was the year I applied. So this was 2018. Um, and then I finally booked a test date in May. And so that's when I really actually kicked it into gear. And so yeah, in May I booked the test date for July 1st. Um, and then um and then after July 1st, booked the second one for like, I think it was like August 1st, and then the last one I think for September 1st, because you have to like space them out.
Yeah.
And the time um after the first one, the 630, I spent most of my time just focusing on the quant sections, with some, I would say probably 80% of my time I did quant, and 20% was just kind of refreshing the reading and IR parts.
Mhm.
And yeah, similar to you, Julia, I remember I'd stay late at the office just because I felt I was in a productive mindset when I was at the office. So I'd go into a conference room at like 6 p.m. And then I think I would usually stay
Mhm.
until like 8, maybe 8:30, sometimes 9. So yeah, that 2 to 3 hours. And I try to do that multiple times a week. And yeah, I mean, you just have to be really regimented. I used a combination of Manhattan prep books that my sister gave me, and then I did Veritas prep as well. One interesting note I will say, so there's one free test that you can take on like basically, what is it, gmat.com or like
Mhm.
something very generic. That is going to be your most accurate for what you
Yes.
will actually get. Veritas Prep really knows how to mess with your confidence, and it seems like
Yep.
they lower your score by, or like they have especially tough questions. And so on average, I know multiple people who are getting 690s on Veritas Prep and then went in and got 750s. Mine wasn't quite that extreme, but for sure, like the one that you take on the GMAT .com or whatever the generic one is absolutely the most accurate.
And so save that one for closer to when you're going to take the test, I think is a
Yes,
good
exactly.
takeaway. Take some of those Veritas preps, take some of the hard ones, like let your confidence take the bruising and then you'll take the real practice test and go, I'm a genius. It's a good point. And I think the other thing is if you're taking practice tests and you're realizing, man, because they'll do some analysis on the types of questions that you're struggling with. I am just bombing these kinds of questions. It is worth business school in general is a huge investment. It costs a ton of money to go. And if you're trying to give yourself the best chance, considering a GMAT tutor is not necessarily a bad idea. In particular, if it is targeted areas that you really think if you can ace those, you can boost your chances and some of that one-on-one attention. So a Manhattan Prep, some of these other courses, they're great for just generally getting ready for the test, but they're not going to give you that in general. There's some coaching, but one-on-one coaching, but the big classes aren't going to help you solve all your problems with probabilities or whatever it might be. If you're seeing yourself continue to struggle on one subject area, go on Yelp and look up GMAT tutor in my area, or now with Zoom, you can do it anywhere. It's worth
You found yours
considering.
through Yelp, right?
Yeah, and I used a GMAT tutor briefly for a very specific part of the math section I was struggling on, and I give her full credit as to why I got the 730. And it is a bit like having, it's a luxury. It's a nice to have. You do not need to have it to get a good GMAT score, but it is a bit like getting a personal trainer. I could go to the gym and I can work out by myself, but if I'm, once a week paying a decent amount of money for a few weeks to be focused, I'm going to really be focused because I put my money where my mouth is. And so it was the right decision for me to do it. But it might not be the right decision for everybody, but it's worth considering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I ended up doing Veritas Prep had some type of package where you just got a lot of practice questions and you got some tutorials. I did not get through all the tutorials in time, but they were helpful. And I believe that was like $250 versus 800 for some of the more extensive tutorials. And so, yeah, I mean, I feel like it's absolutely worth paying for some type of prep unless you're, an amazing test taker and can crush it from the get-go.
That being said, one nifty hack. The vast majority of you who are applying to business school probably know someone who has recently applied or is thinking about it. Once you're done with those GMAT books, not only are they not useful, they are a painful reminder of the time that you've spent sitting on your kitchen counter, and most people want to burn them. And so doing a quick outreach, even having some forethought, saying, hey, I hear you just applied to school. Are you done with your GMAT books? Would you, could I pay a small fee for them, or would you be willing to donate them? And they often come with codes for free tests, and maybe they haven't used all of those. So that is, you do not need to buy brand new GMAT books. Ask around because, man, people want those off their hands.
Also, I feel like even Facebook Marketplace would be,
yes,
like Facebook Marketplace wasn't a thing when I was doing it, but I bet that's a place where you could find discounted ones. And
it's a way to get started.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't spend the money up front. Spend the money when you can be more targeted about where you need the help.
That's
get a general picture first.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, I would say in terms of wrapping up some takeaways, you're not going to really take it seriously until you actually have a test time booked. So book it sooner rather than later. Book it with plenty of time to take it 3 times at least. With about, ideally, I think like a month to 2 months spacing between each test. And frankly, also try to get it out of the way sooner so that the last couple weeks before applying, it's really essay, resume, all those other parts of your application you can focus on. Um, get a general picture, get some feedback, or like figure out where you can take the free tests. Get a general picture of what you like. Start by just taking a test to see where you fall right now, and where your opportunity areas are. And then, if needed, get that targeted help for, if needed and, financially doable, get that targeted help if you can. Apparently Yelp has GMAT tutors. It doesn't need to be through like one of these Manhattan prep companies. Actually, it's probably a better or much
Yes.
better financial deal to
Yes.
find them through Yelp. Anything else to add to that, Julia?
I would say in terms of timing, this is the timing. This is just sort of a very highly specific version that worked for me. Um, is I started studying in like this kind of roughly around this time. Started thinking about it November to December. It's typically a time when you have little less going on at work, and so I booked my test for like late January, early February. You might have time off. You might be home from the holidays. Maybe there's a little less going on socially. And so you can dedicate yourself when it's cold and dark. You're going to be a little miserable anyway. Might as well buckle down. That way, if you take it in February, maybe you need to retake it once in March or April. And then you can be done with that and focus from April until round one on your essays and recommendations. That is, I think, a schedule that worked really well for me. But finding a time where you can take it where for that month, maybe 2 months when you're studying, uh, your social life, it has to be a priority unless you're a genius
Mm-hmm.
test taker,
Mm-hmm.
which neither of us are. We're both good, decent. I think picking a time where you can really say, this is my time to buckle down. And I think the winter right around now, not a bad time to think about it.
Yeah, that's a great point. It was really hard continuing to find that motivation to study in the summer when so much is going on and your weekends fill up. And, when it's nice outside after work, it would be so much nicer to just go on a nice walk outside.
Yep.
And so, yeah, and again, this obviously applies to only certain parts of the country, but if you don't, yeah, double down in times when you're naturally going to have less to do.
Yep. So, guys, we've talked about a fair amount on this episode. We gave you advice. If you get waitlisted, do not despair. Come up with your plan B. Go back and listen for how to manage, but don't despair. Round one versus round two, it really depends on your level of preparation. The other two only, round three only in extreme circumstances, and rolling, apply as early as you feel ready to give your best shot. And GMAT versus GRE, Alex, I think you summed up well. GMAT is a signal of your quantitative aptitude. That being said, if you have enough in your background quantitatively that shows that you can handle the math classes, GMAT or GRE, both are great. Give yourself enough time to take it a few times, and try to get free books, because God knows we don't want to give the GMAT Commission any more money than they already have.
Absolutely.
Well, it was a pleasure to chat with you, Alex.
Pleasure as always, Julia. Yeah, no, good luck to all of you guys applying and studying, and or just starting to think about it.
And please send in questions so we can answer more questions targeted to what you guys want to hear about. Bye,
Bye.
guys.
Cool.
Okay.
That was
I
good.
think